let's get started with a quick round of introductions. I just want to know who you all are and what's the one thing that you care about the most, starting from you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Neha Joshi. I'm from Dehradun. You probably all have heard of Dehradun, Uttarakhand. And I work as a consultant with the Ministry of Petroleum, particularly on the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. I'm also a politician. I started out my political journey 2 years back, and I'm part of the national team of the youth wing of BJP. And you will probably see me, now you will recognize me on certain media platforms as I represent the party. I am thrilled and honored to be here. And one thing that I care about a lot is about women taking center stage. That's something that I'm passionate about, and in everything that I do, I try and bear that in mind and work towards that cause. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Urvashi. I work with the Office of the Vice Chairman at Niti Aayog, where my work focuses on all the social sector areas, including health, nutrition, gender, sanitation, etc. I'm very passionate about the health sector, and what bothers me the most in that is the inequality. While for some of us, going to a doctor or going to a hospital doesn't even require a second thought, there are still people out there who lose their lives, who lose a large part of their family incomes just due to an illness. So that is something that I'd really want to see changed in my lifetime.
Thank you, Urvashi. Pranjal?
I'm a columnist and writer. After more than 2.5 decades in media, I am now focusing on the intersection of technology and economy. And my key concern and interest is on how the fourth industrial revolution is transforming emerging economies like India.
My name is Kishore Desai. I am actually an OSD with Economic Advisory Council to the PM and Niti Aayog. I work with Dr. Vivek Debroy. By academic thing, I am actually from IIT Bombay. I did my chemical engineering, and then I did my MBA from IIM Lucknow. I have about 15 years of work experience. Worked a lot in more than 10, about 12 years in consulting and few years in industry. I was with General Electric also before joining EACPM and Niti Aayog. I have been an passionate follower of the infrastructure sector in India, and I really care about that space particularly.
Wonderful.
Thank
you all for sharing who you are and what you care about. So the topic of today's discussion is taking stock, what has moved forward in the last 5 years, what has worked, what hasn't. And I'd love to take not just a data-driven perspective, but also hear stories, because all of these professionals are practitioners. So let's start with how they got here. I know Urvashi, I know Kishore, both of them are lateral hires, so I think that's one shift. Would you like to talk about what prompted you both to actually give up whatever you were doing and then jump ship and join the government and try and do, or take a different trajectory into work?
So, see, I have actually, when I joined, my first job I joined in 2005. That's when I passed out from IIM Lucknow, and I was working with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their infrastructure advisory team. So that sort of started my journey in the consulting space. Now, infrastructure is such a unique sector that government is the biggest stakeholder in this space. Now, most of the projects are driven, conceptualized by the government, be it union government, state government, local. So that sort of started my interaction with the government, but I was working as a consultant. So I worked for various clients. Some of them could be government, but some could be private entities also, who were interested in developing projects. But in any case, the interaction with the government started. So I worked a lot, analyzed what's happening right, what's happening wrong, what should be done in this space for years. When this government came in 2014, they started the broader thinking was that, look, let's recruit people who are experts in certain fields, and they bring that specific technical expertise that is lacking in the government. Because if you see the broader structure of the bureaucracy, most of the policy makers and the top decision makers come from that administrative, generalist perspective. So this gap of getting some specific technical expertise was there, and that's when some of us, including Urvashi, also sort of. So this opening came and we responded. I have been working for the government indirectly. Now this was an opportunity where I could be working directly with the government as part of the broader government machinery. So I did not have to give up anything. This was always an area where I was really passionate about.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I lost out was money, but that doesn't matter much because the kind of opportunity that one gets in this space is tremendous. You know, I was mentioning I was an infrastructure person all throughout, and I joined as an infrastructure person. One of the first things that I worked on was whether there should be a separate railway budget or not. And me and Dr. Bibek Debroy, we wrote a paper recommending that we do not need a separate railway budget, and the government should think of having one union budget, one nation, one budget kind of a concept. And the government accepted that, and we all know that has been implemented. Couple of initiatives, couple of projects we did on infra, railways, roads. Over a period of time, we diversified, our broader mandate is to provide consulting input, technical consulting inputs in the form of specific technical ideas to the government. And then it's for the government to whether, to take a broader decision based on their own constraints and based on their own priorities.
And you feel that being in the government has given you a better platform to do that as opposed to being from
Absolutely,
the
absolutely. Because I think two things have happened. One, when you are out from the outside, you do not tend to fully appreciate the constraints and the kind of aspects that you need to weigh on. While it is very easy to criticize from outside that सरकार ये नहीं कर रही, वो नहीं कर रही है, ये तो होना ही चाहिए. But when you come inside the government, you are in a position to appreciate those constraints better. Yeah. And therefore, if you bring that private sector experience along with an idea of how the government works, that is a very powerful, I would say, position to be in. And being in government, we think for the government and we do not think for the private. I mean, of course, we think for the entire country as such, but we keep the constraints under which the government works in mind. So that gives us a slightly in a beneficial position. And government does listen to our advice, not all. Of course, I would be lying if I say 100% advice are being implemented, but a significant portion of our advice is actually being considered and implemented.
Yeah.
So that's a very, I would say, it's a very positive thing that, you feel at the end of the day. It's a very rewarding kind of a thing.
Oh, thanks for sharing. Your chapter I read, which talked about lateral entry in that book, could you explain how that has been mainstream now in the government, and maybe for the uninitiated? I'm referring to a chapter in a book which was edited by Mr. Kant, and Urvashi was one of the key writers there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would endorse a lot of the points that Kishore has said. I think for me personally, I had worked a lot, in the health sector prior to coming to the government. And as Kishore said, the government is a huge stakeholder in a lot of the sectors, and health is one of those. In fact, we see a lot of market failures in a sector like health, where the private sector doesn't have incentives to provide a lot of crucial life-saving services that the government does. So I think absolutely, despite whatever flaws that we might see in the government sitting on the outside, you have to be in the system to bring about any kind of large-scale change. And I think definitely my experience as a lateral entrant, it's been very positive. I think the amount of sort of exposure to a range of policy issues, to a range of challenges, on the ground has been unparalleled. And I think what has been very encouraging in the last few years, which as you're saying, it's sort of got mainstream now. We've seen a lot of people like this come into the system. There are people younger than us as well, and then there are more experienced people like us who are also entering the government system. And I really hope this is a trend that continues and grows in the future, because the world is becoming highly specialized. While we do need our, general administrators, and the bureaucracy is an absolute cornerstone of the government, but we also need specialists. Right. And I think the fact that that is now being recognized is a huge positive.
And it's something that anyway happens in many other countries.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's something we highlighted in the chapter as well, in the book that you just mentioned, that a lot of other countries have experimented with lateral hires in different ways, and I think they've also realized that at least there's one big positive that you get out of it, which is the level of specialization that a sectoral person can bring. Right. So I think for those reasons, I really hope we continue this path.
Yeah. I just want to come to you because you were passionate about multiple things, Ujjwala scheme being one of them, but you're also an outsider. You're not a civil servant by training. So as somebody who's working in that capacity in the ministry, what kind of advantages/disadvantages do you see in having such an outside-in approach for governance?
So when I was asked to come work for the ministry, it just happened per chance. It was a few conversations where I was talking about Ujjwala and how this was 1 year, a little less than a year since Ujjwala was launched in 2016. And we were discussing about how Ujjwala has sort of broken the access barrier and put women at the center of India's energy policy. What didn't seem to be working at that point was that how is adoption going to take place? Because breaking the barrier is just the first step. And it was heartening to see that the government was open to ideas. It was open to the proposition that this is the first step. Instead of just sitting back and lauding itself and saying, okay, we're going to go and give these 8 crore connections, we will do much more is what they said. And that's when they sought help from experts, specialists such as me and many others in my team, and said that let's come up with a framework where we can go a step further. We will not just give all these women LPG connections. We will go a step further and think about what are the barriers that prevent them from using these gas cylinders. What are the factors that prohibit them from sustainably using them over the years? Cost is just one of the factors. There's so much more that goes into the process of behavior change. And I'm so glad that the government is fast recognizing, and I think Urvashi would agree with me, you know, behavior change, whether it's about health, whether it's about education, it is a gradual and very, very slow process. Given the best of conditions and the kind of diversity that India presents, it becomes even more challenging. So it is heartening to see that the government is really opening up to the idea of independent people such as me coming in and bringing our focus of gender, bringing in our focus of development. I'm a purely development person. I just have like 1 year of experience in the corporate sector, which I failed at miserably, and I was like, I can't do this. So since then, my education has been social work and economics, and I've been very focused on working on development, but one thing that I struggled with was scale. Because any development intervention, whether you look at the non-profits that are working, small projects that are working, replicability is always an issue. And working with the government, you get the scale. You get the resources to replicate models, to try new things. And yeah, I think it's great that these doors are opening and more people like me can enter the government and try and impact a little bit of change here and there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Pranjal, you write, I've read a lot of your articles, even your book, which I thoroughly enjoyed, on the 4th Industrial Revolution. I'll come to the specifics of what your recommendations are, but let's start with broad strokes. In the past 5 years, and you've been a writer for 20 years plus now, in the past 5 years, what are some of the positive and negative shifts, I'm talking broad strokes, that you've seen which are different from, say, the norm?
I think the most important platform that this government has been able to do is to use technology for delivery of government services, which I think is very important because technology brings you accountability, efficiency, and transparency. And our government systems over the previous many decades since independence have miserably failed in delivery of whatever the government has to offer. And I've always believed that India is not a poor country, it's a poorly managed country. And the poor management comes out of the fact that we don't have the governance systems, partly because they're corroded and they're overly process oriented, partly because of distrust that the government system has of the society because of our colonial issues, which we have not been able to resolve, but mostly because we were very dependent on archaic systems. And I think this effort of using mobile technologies, which is used so often that it's become a cliche, but I think you cannot undermine the importance of what has been achieved. You know, using mobiles for opening banks of 300 million people in the last few years is a tremendous achievement. No country across the world has managed it. And I think one of the things we must understand for India, especially for development and economics, is that you cannot have a solution which has been used abroad for India. India has its own unique issues, and therefore a model which is created for India is going to be developed in India. It cannot be something which is important. And I think, therefore, the use of mobile technologies, and now, you know, I work very closely with the World Economic Forum's 4th Industrial Revolution Center, and Prime Minister himself inaugurated the center a few months ago. the new projects which are coming up of using drones for ensuring that agriculture productivity come up is fantastic. You know, the pilot projects are being run with the government of Maharashtra, where drones and sensors embedded in the soil are going to give you the kind of information that farmers need for planning the next crop. Now, this kind of use is completely unprecedented, and you are now looking at mid-level of bureaucracy, lower bureaucracy, interdepartmental coordination, which is now going to happen and has to happen for things like these to succeed. So, I think that has been a tremendous achievement of the government. What I think the government has not done enough of is the piece on education and skilling. I know the skilling initiative started even with the previous government. There were several issues with it in terms of the model. I won't take away from what they have achieved, but I do think that this government should now focus on how should people live in the world of the fourth industrial revolution. I think that piece, in terms of equipping us for a completely new world at a scale which no other country has been able to think of, is the real challenge today.
Yeah. No, I really liked what he said about India not being a poor country but a poorly managed country. I think to some extent the conceptualization of Niti Aayog and getting people from the outside is one way to try and address that. But do you agree that in the past 5 years, India has become a significantly better managed country?
So, I mean, it's a slightly broader question, Utkarsh, per se. But I would like to answer it from this perspective that, look,
Let me try and make it more specific.
Yeah.
So he gave you an example of drones
Correct.
in agriculture. So
Correct.
Andhra has also been using AI to enhance
Correct.
agricultural productivity. Somebody once told me India suffers from pilotitis, which is like the ability to keep doing pilots without scaling them. So a greatly managed country or a greatly managed cooperation will be able to pick up these pilots and scale them, like maybe what has been done in China.
Correct.
So how would you respond to that?
So, see, I would say that, let me give you 1 or 2 examples from the infrastructure sector. And, things have actually moved very, very fast. And I would say 4.5 years is a very small time for a sector like infra, where hazar complexities are involved, starting from land acquisition. Even if you have to develop something, you have to first ensure that land is acquired. Then there are clearances to be taken, be it environmental clearance, forest clearance, so on and so forth. Then development, operations, maintenance. So that cycle is there, right? Despite that, I'll give you a very interesting example as to how things have changed. When I started my career in 2005, just 1 year after, I think the Minister of Railways announced this project for setting up of locomotive factories. We all know, that they wanted to set up 2 factories, one in Madhepura for manufacturing electric locomotives and one in Marhora. Both of these places are in Bihar for manufacturing diesel locomotives. That was in 2006. We got the job of structuring that project. We worked very hard. It was a crown project for us. I mean, all of us were really excited. That was a project in a sector where none of the manufacturing facilities were owned by private players. It lacked technology. Then a sector where the only customer was the government. There was no other customer. So even if a private player comes, he actually faces business risk, because tomorrow if the government refuses to buy, then it has no other place to sell.
Right.
So these were major complexities, right? We structured it. 2008, we submitted our recommendations. Things happened. In 2009, I think, just before, few months before, 2008 end, the project reached a stage where they invited financial bids, right? Players bid. I mean, foreign technology owners, they bid. When you bid, you have to actually invest a lot of money, because you have to first study, you have to employ a battery of legal consultants, you have to figure out your supply chain, and so on and so forth. So everybody who has bid for that project has actually invested millions of dollars, and it's that expensive. Nothing happened. Government did not take a decision. It just, whatever happened, the bids came, but the projects were not awarded. Next government came, UPA 2. In 2011, around that time, again we got the same project. This time we were a bit not sure, but we were still excited that, look, we have already done. Things moved, bids were again invited. Nothing, no decision happened. In 2014, when the new government came, when the NDA, the new government came, I was working with General Electric, which was actually one of the bidders. The government, when they came up, the railway minister announced that these projects are a priority project for us. GE US, we were in discussion. They were like, look, we have seen this cycle. We have invested so much of money. We are not sure. I mean, they were very skeptic that things will move. We sort of spent hours just to convince that, look, the government has changed. Their working style is very different, and we are very hopeful. Of course, you cannot commit. But we had to sort of sell the India story to them. We had to tell them, look, what has changed is the way this government thinks. Somehow they were like, okay, fine, because you're saying we'll come. In 2015, the bid process started. And I think by the end of 2015 or around early 2016, projects are awarded. Now, look at it from the outside, right? These projects together are projects which involve an investment of about 40,000 crore rupees. Two latest state-of-the-art technology, rolling stock equipment would be manufactured. Huge amounts of jobs would be created, and railways is a sector where the economic multiplier is 5. Meaning, if you invest 1 rupee, the economic benefit because of direct and indirect, forces is 5x of that 1 rupee you invested. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But we took 10 years, and it just took somebody to just sign that file, just to be brave to take that decision. Now that factory, I mean, I've learned that first lot of locomotives are now, that prototype testing is on. Now, haven't things changed? We have seen, again talking about railways, dedicated freight corridor project. I mean, all of us know it is a must for India, where we are facing a situation where, major sections of Indian Railways are operating at 120% capacity. There are certain sections, this Ghaziabad Mughal Sarai, the northern section, which operates at 160% capacity. Meaning trains are running bumper to bumper. If we visualize, it's like ek ke piche ek trains chal rahi hain. There is no capacity to, so forget about speed, it is a safety hazard. Why have we not been able to create more infrastructure? We took 10 years. I mean, the project was in the making, but it is now that 400 kilometers of that entire eastern and western freight corridor have been made operational.
Yeah.
And by March 2020, it is expected that the entire project will be commissioned. So, what has changed? The point I'm trying to say is, you do not need to really, identify novel schemes, novel ideas. What you need to do is essentially just sit, put your foot, just understand, get into granular details, get into that problem-solving mode. I'll give you one more example of roads. In 2010, the minister of, the road minister, the highway minister announced that he would be aiming for a target of about 20 kilometers per day construction of national highways. The focus, of course, went into awarding more projects. That was the time when NHAI had awarded historically highest, I think around 10,000 kilometers of PPP. But the projects were so poorly structured that the entire sector, the road and highway sector, literally collapsed in the next 4 years. And there was a time when construction rate dropped to almost 3 to 4 kilometers per day. Now, what's the construction rate? It is almost 28 kilometers per day. Now, it is not a fluke. From there to this position, somebody has actually tried to solve problems in a very systematic, in a very diligent manner.
Yeah.
Lots of things have changed.
Well, that's great to know that it is
Yeah.
taking steps towards becoming better managed. Like, tell me healthcare. Like, tell me a couple of statistical figure or stories or policy measures that give you a lot of confidence that in the past 5 years, things have moved forward or not, like whatever.
Yeah, I think healthcare, what's been interesting, I think there's been two major things. One is that there have been interventions to build every level of the health system, whether it is public health, and I'll come to a couple of specific examples, but whether it's public health, whether it's primary health care, you have the 1.5 lakh health and wellness centers that have been announced, whether it's secondary and tertiary care, which is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, or the health insurance scheme, which is being talked about a lot. Whether it's human resources for health, right? So new medical colleges are being invested in. Niti Aayog, in fact, led the drafting of the National Medical Commission bill, which is, of course, it's currently pending in Parliament. But the Medical Council of India, which has really been a very problematic body for the longest time, has just recently been replaced by a very competent and meritorious board of governors. To really sort of run medical education much better in the country, whether it's medical devices or drugs, right? Through the Jan Aushadhi stores, drugs have become much more affordable. Cardiac stents, knee implants have become much more affordable. So if you look at the whole picture, there has been, I would say, a very systematic attempt to, intervene at every level of the health system rather than on a piecemeal basis, which is something that might have happened historically. The other is that health has actually come right at the center of policy and political discourse. It's not often that I've walked away from a budget speech of the finance minister like it happened last year, and my biggest takeaway has been health. Ayushman Bharat was the biggest discussion point, and in fact, it remains the biggest discussion point. Whether you criticize it, whether you support it, at least we're talking about health much more. And I think that's crucial because health has to be a policy priority, a political priority, and a public priority. It cannot be something that, okay, when we fall sick, we care about health, but most of the times we're not bothered discussing about it. So I think that's been a huge and a very encouraging shift that I've seen. Somebody who's been in the sector for years and has often struggled to get health, into the center stage. I find that that's become very different now. In terms of a couple of examples, more specifically, as you said, I think if I think about the Mission Indradhanush program, which is the immunization program, we've seen spectacular success there, and in fact, I think as far as public health programs go after polio, this is probably one of the most successful, and in fact, it's received a lot of global acclaim as well recently. So if I just give a comparison point, between 2009 to 2013, we were increasing immunization coverage by about 1% per year. In 2 years of Mission Indradhanush, we managed to raise it to about 6.7% in some of our poorest districts. We've immunized about, I think, 2.5 crore children, about 70 lakh pregnant women just in those first 2 years. So I think what you were even talking about, the pilotitis, right? I think we've seen a lot of scale being achieved in such programs. And I think that gives a lot of hope for the future. Swachh Bharat is, I think, another one where the sanitation coverage has really ramped up. From about 30% in 2014 to now we're at over 90%. Of course, sustaining that and bringing about the behavior change is going to be the challenge in the future, because building toilets is just one part of it. But I think at least we've got to that, step one, which itself we were going at a very slow rate previously. So I think there's a lot of positives that have come out in the last 5 years, but I think health is a very complex sector. We can never say that the job is done or even close to being done. We have a lot more to do in the future if we are to truly achieve universal health coverage, which is sort of the bigger overarching goal. But we've certainly been set on the right path, and I think there's a lot of hope coming out of that.
Seems like the ball has moved forward. Do you agree in your sector?
Absolutely, and I'm going to start off from where Urvashi left when she said preventive healthcare is something that Mr. Nadda talked about in the morning, and you touched upon that. That when you look at a scheme like Ujjwala, and I'm going to speak strictly on that because my experience is on such a large scale is limited to Ujjwala. But look at the simplicity of this scheme. Think of 2014, 60 plus years from independence, and we had only 13 crore LPG connections in the country. The LPG penetration was at 55%. Just think about it. It took 60 years for India to get to that number. And today, as we stand here, the Vice President of India, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, gave out the 6th crore Ujjwala connection on the 2nd of January, right here in New Delhi, which took our LPG coverage to 90%. We covered 14 crore plus LPG connections in just 3 years. How is it that we were able to achieve this? If you look at who drives this sector, it is the 3 oil marketing companies, Indian Oil, HPCL, BPCL. Same people, same officers, same distributors. Of course, I'm going to talk about a little about what we did on the supply side, But we took petroleum ministry and we looked at it, we transformed it from being like a corporate ministry to almost a welfare ministry. I mean, if you talk to the distributors, you know what your LPG distributor looks like, right? Do you like him? I mean, most people I speak to say LPG distributor chor hai. That was the constant refrain that we heard when we started on the ground. Today, when we had 13,000 distributors in 2014, the number is up to 20,000 plus, and what LPG distributor looks like has changed. The LPG distributor is no more a king. He cannot decide किसको connection देना है, किसको नहीं देना है, and that has come from the leadership. The Prime Minister standing at the Red Fort, talking about कि एक गरीब महिला जब खाना बनाती है चूल्हे पे तो 400 सिगरेट का धुआं उसके शरीर में जाता है. That is what it took to deliver this change. Dharmendra Pradhan at the helm of affairs, leading this change. I have seen the minister, I mean, I'm really getting into, like you said, the granularity of things, I have seen him, we had one officer dedicated in each district that the minister would correspond with. Technology was used to its optimum. There was a dashboard that the minister was looking at every day. How many connections released every day? How many new distributorships commissioned? So this mammoth task was achieved in 3 years by the sheer political will and also prioritizing health and well-being and putting women at the center stage. And of course, nothing was done in silo. We had the Jan Dhan revolution, we had Aadhaar, and we had mobile, the JAM Trinity as we often call it. So the JAM Trinity was leveraged to achieve this. And today the whole world is looking at us. I attended the Global Clean Cooking Forum in Delhi last year, and we had Rachel Kite who talked about how India has leapfrogged, all over the world people are looking at us. How was India able to achieve this? Here was a nation that was struggling to provide energy security, and suddenly 90% coverage, it is humongous, and we have to be so proud of it and recognize that it was political will, but also coupled with a lot of experts that work together seamlessly to bring this change about. So that's what I want to say.
Wonderful. No, thank you. Pranjal, you touched upon education, skilling, and having read your book, I know that you have an astute understanding of fourth industrial revolution. Let me start by a broader question. Do you think India is taking concrete steps to march closer towards the fourth industrial revolution? Do you see something beyond pilots and talk going on? If yes, what is that?
I think there is still some effort to be made. There is what I think one should accept and celebrate is that there is recognition that there is a fundamental change which is happening. So the name of my book is Kranti Nation, India and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and I use this word because I abbreviated the words. It's called KRANTI. It's Knowledge, Research and New Technology in India. And if you remember, if you recall, a few days ago, Prime Minister started using the word Anusandhan, which is research. So we need knowledge, we need research, we need new technology in India, which is now accepted in the government. And I think that's an important achievement. It's now for the government system and the various agencies to start building on this. Even if we are building new medical colleges, we are building new IITs, we don't have the faculty for those. And that's being a crying need for the country. You must have seen the recent list which talks about the top 100 scientists of the world. Indians are missing in those. We have barely 10 out of the top scientists of the world. This is based on the kind of work which has been published and activated, and this is applied technologies and thoughts and research as well. I think this government has not been able to build that kind of momentum, but I can understand it because there are a lot of other achievements that it has made. But on education, we've had 2 or 3 committees which have been set up to reform the education system. We are still not helping our children to be attuned to the new way of looking at technology. STEM, which is a fundamental focus, is still in such a siloed fashion. We have very old bureaucratic organizations where there's better thinking now, but the structures haven't changed.
Right.
So you still have a situation where a student who does not do physics, chemistry or maths and leaves one of them out cannot do a BSc or a BTech in India. While in other countries, especially US, where loads of our children go, you can do a BA in computer science.
Yeah.
Now, if you say BA in computer science to any educator in India, their brains will explode. Why? Because they can't put BA and science together. Now, these are very fundamental rigidities in our education system, which I think have to be addressed as soon as possible. then I would say that the important strides towards changing our country will happen. The use of technology is tremendous. What has happened in terms of, as I think Neha gave a great example of having a dashboard and monitoring things, the government systems and the delivery systems have been tremendous. But apart from the use of technology, enabling it for people to become more comfortable about it, skilling people in terms of, our from school, college to higher education, we have still teaching science of the 1960s. So we have to move towards that. Now that the government is using technology in the most public way possible, I hope that in the next effort would be to ensure that education and skilling becomes more modern, more flexible and not rigid, to ensure that we get all the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. Otherwise, this will hold us back in a very strong way.
I completely agree. I firmly believe that India suffers from what I like to call the great Macaulay hangover. Somehow we still haven't gotten past it. But I was encouraged to read that the government recently has decided to launch an AI curriculum in standard 8, 9, 10. They're talking about it. Let's see when that gets introduced.
It's very important because
Yeah.
this is something which you have to get the psyche of the society to be attuned towards technology, because it is there in everything. So whether you talk about health tech, edu tech, you talk about fintech, it's there. We're using it. As users, we are aware of it, but as learners, we are not.
Yeah. I just want to ask you one more question, but let me take stock of time. How are we doing? We're okay. Just fine. Okay. Very quickly, do you feel on fourth industrial revolution, do you think that as a country we are asking the right questions, all factors considered, privacy, security, AI, blockchain, everything considered? Are we asking ourselves the right questions or not?
Yes, I think, as I said, the society and the government and all the bodies are asking the right questions. They have finally understood the importance of this fundamental shift. Now, an action plan has to be built on it.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, since I have 5 minutes, I'm going to request each of the speakers to give me a 1-minute summary of one thing they look forward to and one thing that they're afraid of in the coming 5 years. It need not be elections.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Can I just take 1 minute in just sort of
Sure.
adding to what Pranjal
Sure.
was saying? See, I think this is slightly related to what Neha was also saying. So when we talk about technology, there are many things that we don't even understand right now, and how will those things impact? For example, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and machine learning, the concepts of that. We as a system also, I don't think we have understood the kind of disruption that these forces can bring, and how do we sort of leverage these disruptions positively. When Jam Trinity happened, we did not, so these things happened independently. I mean, so there was this Aadhaar which was going on as the identity program, then mobile penetration, etc. was also going on independently. But somewhere down the line, the government realized that, look, we can link these 2-3 different developments to deliver certain benefits to the society, right? So these 3 things got linked. Now these developments are happening. The curriculum you mentioned is going on. So how will these benefit? We do not know. That is the first point. And I think this is just the start. And it may take some time for us as a society to really realize and reap the benefits. So it may be slightly premature to say that, look, we are not doing enough.
Yeah.
And I think the point I also wanted to communicate was, look, government should not be, I think we need to get out of this mindset that, look, government needs to do everything, especially in the areas where technology and, so private sector also, and the government just needs to ensure that they are not standing as a roadblock in development of, those areas.
Fair enough, but I do think that Pranjal's point wasn't that the government isn't not only doing enough.
Okay, sure.
But yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of...
But I do think that structural changes in curriculum is the government's response. You can't
Yeah,
expect a private sector to make a curriculum. They'll make it quite interestingly. But anyway, one thing you look forward to, and one thing that you're worried about.
So, see, as I mentioned earlier, so I'm very passionate about infra, and I think a lot of things have happened positively
So you'll
in
see
infra.
more of that infrastructure.
Of course, and I
one
think
thing you're
the
worried
speed
about?
acceleration needs to increase.
Yeah.
And I think we should move to the next stage, which is how to sustain whatever development has taken place.
Yeah.
So we now need to ensure that the operations and maintenance of the projects that are already there need to happen smoothly. So I think that thinking needs to be there.
Yeah.
So I think the tremendous achievement of using technology for delivery of government services, which has brought accountability, efficiency and transparency, is a very big step which this government has taken and the previous governments did not do that. That's very exciting. What worries me is that the pace of change in terms of changing the government systems and processes, I think it's still slow, and it's linked to what I said earlier. If you look at the work done by startups, government is the biggest buyer in the country. We still have these archaic systems that you will only buy products or services from companies which are a certain size,
certain
revenue,
revenue.
and background.
Yeah.
But the best innovation is coming up from kids who are, groups of 5 or 10 who probably have not more than a year's of experience. Why should the government not get the benefit of them? So I think those changes in approach are very critical, and I hope that this thinking of the government will percolate to this level as well.
So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I'm most excited about is, as I said before as well, health very much becoming a policy, political and public priority, an election issue as well, because no matter what caste or religion you are, you need good health. And we're not going to realize the demographic dividend that we keep talking about unless we have good health. So let's
Yeah.
see it that way. I think something which makes me a little worried is that, for instance, the health insurance scheme which has just been launched, there's a lot of people who sort of just immediately criticize and, want to find all the flaws and drawbacks in that, which I think is fine, but I think we really need to work together, whether it's the private sector, whether it's experts, whether it's the government. No health program is going to be perfect straight away, and no country that has achieved universal health coverage has done it immediately or in a short span of time. So I hope that we don't just keep launching new schemes, but I think we persist with what we have and try to work through the challenges and scale them up and eventually, hopefully, achieve universal health coverage.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
I think what I look forward to is more synergy, where we look at, I constantly talk about that, having an LPG cylinder saves women's time, reduces the time poverty for women. But how do we translate this time saved into economic value? We need synergy. We need the government to step in. We need more skilling. We need the private sector to step in and provide more opportunities, especially in the rural areas. So that's something that I'm really hopeful about, and we are doing multiple experiments across the country to see how we can bring this about. How can we transform this time into economic value? What I'm worried about is that there is this euphoria and there is a lot of energy right now. I don't want this energy to sort of dissipate and a fatigue to step in. So like you said, whether it's infra, whether it's technology, health, energy, all of these sectors, we're on the right track. I do hope that we can continue to be on the same track in the coming years.
Excellent. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I certainly learned a ton from asking these questions. You've been a great audience. At least you listened and took pictures. Thank you for that. Thanks, Abhay. I think there's lots to be covered, and I think that we should have a follow-up in the next edition. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.